I live in Chattanooga. I've been turning for not too long, for a few years, but I turn just about every day. And once I bought a lathe, I kind of gave up everything else. The classic story: my table saw became another bench, and that holds everything. And I haven't used it in a long time. But if I go a day without turning, it seems like I'm missing something. So it's been a really cool, creative outlet and a fun way to meet a lot of new people. Talking about symposiums, if you've never been to one, the first time, no matter which one it is, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. You go and it's overwhelming, and it takes a few days to get over it. But you go the next time and you see people that you met prior, and then you go to the next time, and it's just like making a family. Say it's more than friends. You're meeting family members and people that do the same thing and love the same thing, and what's better than that? But as far as turning goes, today we're going to focus on the Calabash bowl, and you guys get to be a little bit of a guinea pig. I've never done a demo on this before, but it's probably the thing that I turn the most. The other demos that I usually do are a little bit more kitschy and unique, but this I'm really excited to do because it's what I like to do. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So what's a calabash? Has anybody ever turned a calabash bowl or knows what a calabash bowl is? All right, several hands. The really only requirement is that it has a round bottom. There's a whole lot of variations, but when you turn a bowl, you typically put a foot on it so it's going to sit well on a flat surface. With a calabash bowl, it's rounded. Now that being said, the old ancient Hawaiian calabashes, so it's a form that comes from ancient Hawaii, was a completely round bottom because they would put their bowls, and they were used as food storage. They would put them in the sand or on a piece of cloth or something like that. So the rounder the bottom, the more stable it was. But as we move to putting our bowls on tables and flat surfaces, usually we'll end up turning a little divot in the bottom so it sits true. Aside from a round bowl, typically you come in a little bit. So you have the rule of thirds. You typically put the widest points about a third of the way from the bottom. But that's all. It really all comes down to how traditional you want to be and what your design choice is. And today we're going to focus on a covered calabash, which is a really fancy way of saying one with a lid. And it's all passed around a few examples. This is the first one I ever turned a long time ago, and I thought it was awesome at the time. I've kind of gravitated away from this design. It looks more like a mushroom than a calabash, but that's a piece of cherry, and it kind of sparked my interest in this specific type. It's got some goodies inside. There's some little mini calabashes inside as well. And this one I turned more recently. It's a pecan, and it's more of the form that I like, and it's a little bit more of the traditional variety. Now with these calabashes, typically you'll finish the outside but leave the inside unfinished, and that is something that is maybe a little bit more traditional than is necessary. Inside would have been used for food, and so typically would leave that unfinished. Outside is for prestige and look, and so that would be polished and whatever finish you want to put on it.
Love the fit.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, we'll talk about the
Looks
lid
like a
fit
solid
as well.
piece.
Thank you. Yeah, with I'll get to that when we get to the demo. There's a specific type of fit that I think works best, like a tight, loose fit, and that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, it'll make sense a little later. This is going to be what we use today. I'm going to have a piece of dogwood, which is a really nice wood, and we're going to turn a calabash that's a little bit like this one, but I turned these two yesterday to show you the differences in types of form. The lids are going to fit about the same, but this would be more like a strict traditional form where the lid would have been used to be a bowl or a little mini plate. So you'd have a deeper lid, and then this one I think is just a little bit more stylish. It's a little bit more rotund. The curves are a little bit better, but I wanted to show you both. I'm going to try to go with one that I think is a little bit more stylish. They're just a tool finish. I didn't sand them or anything like that. Dogwood is, if you've never turned it before, it's really nice. Tight grained, hard, it takes the tool finish really well, and sands okay as well. So we're going to start out with this piece of dogwood. So I brought a whole cadre of tools, but I'm going to spend most of my time with a spindle roughing gouge, a spindle gouge, and we're going to start with a skew just to make some tenons. So what I've done so far, so you don't have to watch me remove the bark and true this up, I just took a limb section, turned it round, and now I'm going to turn a tenon on both ends. So while I do that, you guys can pass around this handout that I brought, or take one, not just pass it around. I'm going to keep one for myself, just in case I forget how to do this. But take one of those. Also, I'll send an electronic version if you guys have a newsletter or attachments or anything like that.
Oh, that's great.
I'll send you that one as well. I always like to have paper. Love to read, and paper is always better than a screen, I think. So let's get started. This should be pretty round, but you know what they say about assumptions, right? Make something out of you and me. So we'll just turn it on and make sure it's true, and then we're going to turn a 10 in on both ends really quickly, and then we're going to take a measurement and part off where we want the lid and the base to be. Right. I'll probably say lid and cover interchangeably. Just same thing. Covered is the traditional way, but lid is the better way to say it. This is my first time on this lathe, so I'll be gentle.
We got it first now.
Okay, there we go. It's pretty big. It's been a rubbing gouge. I'm probably going to say this with every tool that I pick up. This is my favorite tool, but a bit of roughing gouge is really my favorite tool. It is unfortunate that it has the name roughing in its name, because you can get a really nice tool finish. And like I said, that's what I'm going to use mostly, at least for the body of the turnouts. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to turn a 10 in on both sides. I've got a chuck with standard 50 millimeter jaws, so I'm going to turn a 10 in. That is 55 millimeters. Now I've got a pair of vernier calipers. You know, the things that you do in your shop aren't always the same that you do for a demo, so sometimes I'll measure it, sometimes I don't, but for the sake of not screwing something up, I'm going to measure it this time. I've never done this, and I'll say that whenever I demo, I try to speak to the broadest audience. So there are going to be a lot of people that are much more experienced than I am, who have done things that I'm going to say many, many more years than I have. But there are also going to be people that haven't. So I'm just going to outline the techniques that I'm using today, and hopefully everyone's on the same page. So I got these set to 55 millimeters. And when I'm sizing this, I want to be sure that this front point is the only one that's touching. If I touch the back point, this tool is going to flip up and hit me in my protective base shield. And the way I'm doing this is I'm just lightly touching my front point to the wood, and when it aligns, the line that I'm scribing, when it aligns to the back points, I know that I have this sized correctly. So I'm going to do that on both ends really quickly. You can also do this with dividers or other types of measuring devices. This is just something that I haven't used a lot. So I'm going to use a skew for this. I don't know if you guys have a problem with these gremlins in your shop. They take your tools when you set them down and move them somewhere else. But I'm using a skew just to describe a line really quickly. What I'm going to do, for the reason I'm doing this, is just it's going to prevent a little bit of tear out, even though that's not that big of a deal, because we're going to turn that section away anyway. And I'm just making a peeling cut all the way to that line that I described, trying to keep my tool moving perpendicular to the axis of rotation. I'll do that on both ends. The reason I'm doing this on both ends is because I need to treat, almost like you were doing, or exactly at this point, like you were making a traditional lidded box. You want to have a panel on both ends so you can finish the inside and exterior of the body and the lid. Alright, so this is just going to set us up for the future steps. I typically on calabashes, since they do have this rounded profile on the bottom, and we'll talk about that as we get to it, I'll turn a little shoulder as well. That gives me a little bit of extra meat if I mess up, I have some extra wood. And also, I'm ensuring that until I turn it away, my chuck jaws are always going to sit flush against a flat surface, right? They're not going to pinch up against a curved surface, especially these step jaws are not dovetail jaws. So that could be a problem. So that is good. Dogwood is awesome. I haven't turned it that often, but it's great. Typically, I would clean up my tendons with a fiddle gouge, but it's a cheater wood. It's almost like I'm cheating using this wood. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to determine where I'm going to make my body boundary, my lid boundary. So again, I'll just measure this. Typically, I won't do it, but I think it does benefit for these covered forms to have some measurements. All right. And so with this covered form, I'm going to end up with imagine the lid isn't on, I'm going to end up with a calabash that is roughly as wide as it is tall. So you have these square dimensions. So I'm measuring the diameter here, and this is 82 millimeters. I was doing a demo once, and somebody asked me why I'm using millimeters and not fractions. And I thought it was an obvious question or an answer, but the real answer is that's closest to the scale that I'm using, and it's easier to read millimeters than to convert to fractions. So I've got an 82 millimeter diameter, and I've made a mark at 82 millimeters. So that is going to be around the height of my body. All right, so I'm just going to take my pencil, draw a line around this, and then we have roughly the measurement of my body and my lid. My lid is going to be quite a bit shorter than this, so I'll have some extra meat. So what I'm going to do now is going to part these apart, and I'm going to use my skew again, even though it doesn't really matter. It's just you do what you practice. Okay. And I'll make a little line right there, and then one toward the top. And this is going to be a good boundary for my parting tool that just get away. Parting tools are funny. I think most people have probably had this experience. I remember when I first started turning. So imagine I was doing something like this. So I had my cool parting tool, I watched my YouTube videos. I thought I was an expert before I even started. And I was like, oh, I need to part this apart. So I just took my parting tool, kept pushing, kept pushing, kept pushing. And all of a sudden, it got stuck, came up and hit me in the face. Didn't wear a face shield at the time because, you don't know what you don't know. Well, I'll never forget it, and it's probably at least in retrospect, the scariest time I've had as a lady. Probably that parting tool binding. And I've used it before and didn't really think too much of it. So what I'm doing instead to prevent that is I am just moving my parting tool back and forth, creating a wider space than the kerf of my tool. And you can keep going, but for the sake of keeping this as smooth as possible, when you get right down to the little nubbin right here, I'll just take a saw. This is maybe one of my most frequently used non-turning, although it's been converted to a turning object. This little thin curved Irwin flush bit saw, it's awesome. And it bends really easily. Well, that's my second one, but don't tell anyone. So now I have my body and my lid separated. We're going to save the lid for later, and I'm going to check out my body. So now we actually get to making a calabash. So I mentioned before, let's see, I think there's a lock that father. Thank you. That's really the only required feature of a calabash is the rounded bottom. But there is a difference, and I don't mean this to say, I don't mean this to sound elitist or anything in that vein. There's a difference between one that looks good and looks bad, and it's all about proportions and a design opportunity. If you want to make a traditional calabash, then you need to subscribe to a traditional form. Right, so I'll talk about that as we're turning this, and it's all about subtleties. The old adage, you can remove wood, but you can't put it back, is so true. So first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to check this out. And also, I'll say that I teach at a community college as my main job. It would be nice if this was it, but I don't think that's in the books for me. But anyway, so I teach at this community college, and my students are my students. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to yell at me, because I'm used to that. And don't wait for me to stop talking. Just shout it out, raise your hand, or whatever. Let's see. Try not to laugh, because that gives a lot of feedback. Let's see. So I'll take my spindle roughing gouge, and let's true this up. And then I'm going to start making the top. And it's all about subtleties here. This latest thing. I've never worked on this before, but it's really nice. The controls are all really nice. So that's pretty true. All right, so what I want to do first is I'm going to start reducing the diameter of the end. This is going to be the end that fits into the lid. And I'm just going to take really, really light cuts. And it's at this point, you don't want to take lighter cuts than you think. So I'm going to fit a lid that's going to be the same diameter as the base. That's ideally what we're going for. My lid is as wide as the widest point on my base. And I haven't taken out a whole lot of wood, but we're going to start blending this curve into as much as I've taken off. So when we think about proportions, I said the rule of thirds is a good one to go by. You can certainly make a really nice round bottom bowl by making the widest point for the halfway point of this. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, we're making a calabash that's a little bit more traditional, so we want to make sure that our widest point, the belly of the calabash, is about a third of the way. And I won't measure this, you could, so let's just approximate a third of the distance is, say, right around here. Right? And that's going to be a third of the distance from about where my tendon, halfway through my tendon. So I'm going to make this curve that goes and ends about halfway into my tendon. So there's a little bit of imagination, but this pencil line gives us a mark, a reference line, so we know how to erase that with our tool. So I'm just taking really, really light cuts until I have something maybe a little bit more dramatic. You want to focus on getting curves. So what I'm doing with this in the roughing gouge is I'm sort of treating it like a skew. I'm riding the bevel a little bit, dropping my handle, and I'm following the bevel toward my end point. So a lot of people use to spin the roughing gouge like a scraper, which works okay, but you don't really get finesse cuts like that. So that's good for now. We're going to come back to that. We're going to take my spindle detail gouge, and I typically like to use a detail grind on my gouge. Think about if I'm using a spindle gouge, it's all about fine details. If I want to find smooth, continuous curves, I'll use my spindle roughing gouge, or something like a continental gouge. Right here, I'm going to imagine this is my widest point. So I'm going to start thinking out wood, and I'm going to aim to create something. I'm looking at this circular bottom in my mind, and it's not quite a circle like a hemisphere, a half circle. It's more like a balloon that's been slightly deflated. Right? So your round bottom is somewhat flat. We won't see that. And you can just refine the curves. And if you're doing demos, I don't worry about getting the best surface possible. Even in the best situation, most people are going to use sandpaper. Right? And it's a lot more efficient to take some sandpaper and spend 2 minutes blending a curve than for you guys to watch me spend 10 minutes getting just the perfect curve. I'm not going to do that. There's just a demo that was focused on tool surfaces and clean cuts. I'm still going to try to do that, but I'm not really that focused on it. So what I've done now is I've created this curve that goes from this wide point, and it's going to terminate at this vanishing point that is about where that tendon is, or maybe a little bit deeper. I can see a couple of tiny little humps, but that's all right for now. So now let's just refine this a little bit and work on hollowing this out. So beyond this covered calabash demo, I'm also going to talk about installing little butterflies or pava on bowls and how I do that. So I'll move fairly quickly on this. It's kind of a 2-part demo. And I didn't ask this, but do you guys do your demo straight through, or do you take a break in the middle? Cool.
Unless you need a break.
No, it's more fun for me to do it straight through. So we've got this. Let's refine it just a little bit with my spindle roughing gouge. And all I'm going to do is just come in maybe a little bit. I can see that there's a little flat spot right here, a little hump right here. So let's just eliminate those. And I can take my spindle roughing gouge, and instead of maybe treating it like a skew, treat it like a scraper and put it right on its side and get a really nice scraping cut. I'm just barely touching the wood. Now, the one thing about the top of this, I talked about the bottom of the calabash, but the top, you want it so that the top is somewhat straight. And a lot of people talk about there being an illusion where it almost looks like the top flares out. And I think that comes from having this nice, continuous, gentle curve that ends in this subtle straight point. And the reason, especially for this covered calabash, we want a straight top, is that way we can fit it really, really nicely. So I just have my spindle roughing gouge on the side. I'm taking these light cuts. And we can keep going and going and going, but I'm not going to do that. Let's take a couple more little cuts right here. And that is good enough for that. You can always scrape it a little bit. The other reason I like this detail grind is I have these swept back wings on my spindle gouge, and it allows me to get a nice little straight cut. Doing my Woodturners dance, it's all in the hips. You guys have seen Happy Gilmore before that movie. It's all in the hips. It's all in the hips. It's so true. I never would have thought when I first saw that movie that it would apply to wood turning. I didn't even know what wood turning was when I first saw that movie, but it is so true. Thanks. So it's all in the hips. Now we have a line that is pretty good. It's not perfect, so I'll need one more. If I'm at home in my shop, I'm very anal about this. I've got most of my friends don't turn. Former friends. No, I'm not kidding. A lot of my friends don't turn, and sometimes when I meet them, I'll talk about turning, and I find myself talking about how beautiful curves are and what wonderful things round things are, and they look at me like I'm crazy. Well, they're the crazy ones, right? So I can see that's a little bit of a flat point there. I'll do one more, and I'll try to hide that part of my personality. All right. So that's good enough for now. So now, what I want to do is, before I put this down, I'm going to true up the top of my spindle gouge. Now I said spindle ripping gouge is my favorite tool, but maybe spindle detail gouge is my favorite tool. You can do a lot of things with it. You can also get pretty crazy catches if you don't enter correctly, but it's a really good way to do this up. So I've got a flat surface now. I'm going to make a tiny little divot right here, and this is going to allow my drill to seat limb. Actually, I'm going to take my skew and refine that just a tiny, tiny little bit. So the reason I'm drilling, this is an end grain orientation, and I'll talk about that while I'm doing this, but it's typically easier to have a pilot hole, and you can do that with a spindle gouge, but it's kind of nice to talk about drilling on the lathe as a technique. If you've never done it before, and I'm imagining most people have, it's something where the slower you can go, the better. And it's relatively simple. It's kind of one of those things that the first time I ever did, I was terrified for no reason. Now that I look back, there was no reason to be scared. But I was probably going super fast, pushing really hard, and I got this smoke coming out, and it's not very fun. But when you're drilling, you want to keep the speed a little bit lower than you normally would. So let's typically stay about 500 or so. And I have a pretty cheap Jacob's chuck and a breadpoint bit, so I have to flex this a little bit to get it centered. And you can see there's a little bit of vibration, and that's all right for this. So we're just going to go with that. Dogwood, this is semi-green, so it's pretty forgiving. Now, how deep am I going to drill?
What was that bit diameter?
Half inch grad point bit, yes. So I will typically drill, one thing with Calabash is even though we have a little divot on the bottom, it's nicer for the bottom to be a little bit beefier, and that gives you some weight for everything to be pretty stable. So if we were turning the walls of this 1/8 of an inch thick or 1/4 of an inch thick, you want the bottom to be a little bit thicker, maybe a 1/16 or even 1/8 inch thicker. So we're going to imagine that we're going to leave a bottom that is 3/16 of an inch or so. And so I won't be real precise with this, but fortunately we kind of got lucky. The tip of my brad point is about the same, or I guess that's kind of the same as my demo prep pieces, is where this tape is. So if you like numbers, this is going to be 70 millimeters deep, and I will just drill until I meet my blue tape. That'll give me a pilot hole that'll make hollowing this out a little bit easier, but it'll also be a depth indicator. So a little bit of wobble, that's all right. This will be the demo where my drill bit breaks. All right. We're done with it. So also when you're drilling, it's best to start out pretty slowly. until you have about a half of an inch of the drill inside your in your blank. Then you can go a little bit faster. I think I have a soft spot in the pit, and it was kind of moving around here. Yeah, there is a little soft spot. That's my excuse, at least. Gotta have excuses. So now I'm going to hollow this out. You can use whatever hollowing tool you want. And let's see if we can get this little mini light to work.
So you wouldn't progress to like Foster Hills or something?
You can if you want to. I think it's, for something this size, it is just as quick to just start hollowing than to change your drill bits out and go up to the next size. But if I was drilling something bigger or deeper, especially if I'm making something that's bigger than, or if I want to make something that's bigger and I want a depth hole that's wider than my Jacob's shape, then I'll take the time to go up and get really deep. So what I'm going to do here is, again, you can use whatever tool you want, but I'm going to just use a 1/2 inch bowl gouge to do this. And I'll show you a couple of different ways to do this. Really important if you're using a bowl gouge. I'm going to do pull cuts. You want to make sure your cutter's on center. And it's not totally crucial. Center or maybe slightly below center. And I'm going to start by just making these pull cuts. I'm going to make one cut, and I'm going to switch to my spindle gouge for one little detail. I'll talk about that in just a second. So I'm going to make sure that I'm just pulling to the side. Dogwood, again, it's so buttery. We can turn up the speed just a little bit. I'm going, if this matters to you, 1800. And that's as fast as it'll go during the demonstration. So I am just keeping my flute at about maybe 10 o'clock or so. And I'm just pulling it on. I love that ribbon shaving that you get. It's awesome. I've been working a lot with dry as bones wood, so having some green or semi-green wood is a pleasure. So the reason I stopped right there and I'm switching to my spindle gouge really quickly is I want to take just a second to make my rim downward sloping. And it's easier for something like this if I do that now versus if I started to do that, I would have to push against a whole lot of fibers. Or if I did it later when my bowl, even though this is end grain, and the benefit, I should have mentioned that, the benefit of doing this in an end grain style is there's minimal movements. And if my bowl does move, then my lid, since it's part of the same, intimately the same part of the log, it's going to move the same way as my body. So you can pretty much turn this green, dry it, and sand it, and you have a box that's going to maintain a pretty good fit without having to second or twice turn this. That said, most of the time I do this with a finished piece, I'll twice turn it anyway because I'm just anal like that. So I have this downward sloping rim, and I got a tiny, tiny little pitch there, and that's all right. So now I'm going to finish hollowing, which is some pull cuts. And I'll go fairly quickly. I'm not going to spend time trying to get the best surface possible, because you can spend as much time as you want on that. Right? But I'm going to pull this a little bit more than I did before. Now the bad thing about doing a calabash is it's kind of like doing a hollow form, it's a really open hollow form. But since your rim is smaller than how wide you get, all your shavings get trapped and you have to take some time to clean it out. I'll do a tip for that as well. It can be a little bit tricky until you know what you're doing. So if you want to clean your shavings out with your gouge, just turn the flute upside down and rub the back against it. Typically that's all right when you get a little bit deeper and it really gets clogged. So we'll just make some more pull cuts. I'll do this. And I don't want to pull all the way to the bottom because we want to still reduce the diameter of this. Let me pull this out just a little bit to give you some more clearance. So once I get maybe about halfway down, I'll start doing some shear cutting on the inside. And it can be a little bit tricky, but if I raise my handle up, drop the edge of my bowl gouge so it's below center, and really close my flute, then there's pretty low risk of a catch. If I did the same thing and open my flute, that's where you're going to run into a catch, or you're going to remove too much material. But if I keep my flute closed, then I can just make these nice little scraping set. So if I want to move from cleaning out the wood with a pull cut to scraping the interior, I'm just going to start with my gouge at 10 o'clock, pull, and then I get toward the edge, I'm going to close it, and then pull toward me. And it's all muscle memory with this. Kind of one of those things that the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. Now, me saying that, I'm probably going to get a massive pitch and throw this flying, but I hope that's not the case. Now, alternatively, we can do what we've been doing, and you can just keep pull cutting here. So you can see there, I'm getting a little bit of chatter, because that's where my hole is slightly offset. You can probably see that. But there's that little black dot, which is a hole, but it's bigger than it should be because I have a little bit of sour spot. So now, with this, another way to hollow, especially when you have something like dogwood that's super fine grained, I wouldn't recommend this on something that's spalted or pumpy, is you can do just a push cut like you would hollow a side grain piece, like a standard bowl orientation. Right? This is going to be where you're sort of cutting with the left edge of the gouge. It's not as pleasurable because you're making shave or dust instead of shavings, but it can be a little bit faster. You do have to watch out for something like that, though. It can be a little bit faster, especially when you're going a little bit deeper than trying to hold this extended tool and pull towards you. And then I'll typically come in with like a little scraper to do some very, very light shear scrapes on the side, and that gives me a pretty good edge. So let's go a little bit further. Something that can make this, whether you're clearing it out with back bowl gouge, make this a little bit easier is if you have a box rest or maybe a tool rest that's just a piece of hardened steel that you can really get inside. That way you're not so overhung. And even though this is pretty shallow, even with this half-inch gouge, I'm overhung. So what I'm doing is I'm just pushing really hard with my left hand, pushing down against the tool rest, and keeping a tight grip with my right hand. And it still allows me to move a pretty good amount of wood. I have some funky center right there. But as long as I keep my tool handle up, you can usually handle anything like that. It's not that bad. So now I'm pretty much at the depth I want to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another push cut where that's a tricky point right here, this widest point, where you have to transition from this cut that's going kind of toward me to the widest point, so we have to make this fast curve going toward the interior. So I'm going to do a pull cut, or a push cut, sorry, that same sort of thing as before. And when I get to this point, I'm going to close my flute in the other direction. So I'm about 10 o'clock in the other direction. So I'm rolling it over, and then I'm transitioning to this push cut. I really enjoy this because you have this nice dance that you do. It does take a little bit of care, and there's only so much you can do with this, because with the Calabash being closed rim, my tool handle is against the side of the edge. And if I've spent a lot of time and refining this and getting smooth surface, I don't want to press my tool handle or my tool handle against the edge, so to create a lot of like chatter dents. Okay, so I just do Woodturners dents. Be very careful when you're sticking your hand inside of a spinning bowl, obviously, but I'm just doing this to check the curve, but it's pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I've got this little nubbin, and you might be able to see this. Let's see. Let's blow it out. There we go. So I've got a little quarter-sized nubbin that I need to get rid of. And we'll do two things to get rid of that. One, I'm just going to make a couple of lighter pull cuts, barely touching the wood and just pulling slowly. And then I'll use a different tool, or just show you a different tool that you can use. So here, I'm going to reinforce this. I'm going to put my hand a little bit closer up and then put my wrist or my forearm on the handle just to give you some nice control. Keep my flute at about 10 o'clock. I'm just going to make really light pull cuts. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to get rid of that nubbin, but I'm also trying to transition that bottom curve into that side curve that I made. And with these really, really light cuts, so I'm just barely taking away wood. I should be able to get a relatively smooth surface. Now, you gotta be kind of careful because you get some catches being so overhung. Right. But there, we've got something that is okay. But if you still have trouble with this, like I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna go in a little bit more. Yeah, that's not really fun. It's not very fun. So what you can do is use something like, you can use a bottom bolt gouge that has a steeper grind to it, or use something like this Hunter Badger. I'll try to just demo with as few tools as possible, although I don't have this big lineup. But for the bottom of this, especially when it's a form that's a little bit deep compared to how wide it is, it's nice to have something where the cutter's at a different position. So for a Hunter Badger, you have this carbide, it's a cupped carbide cutter that's angled, right? And if you've ever used a Hunter tool, it's awesome. It's a game changer for something like this. It could be kind of terrifying. The first time I used this, again, I was a YouTube pro. I watched some videos, thought I would be an expert. I was doing this big-ish hollow form. And, oh, this will be great. I put it in, I put my cutter straight up. So this will be the totally open position, just like a bowl gouge. Stuck my tool in on the side and got one of the worst catches of my life. It still terrifies me. So I learned really quickly not to do that. So if you just close the cutter a little bit and then also angle it this way, you get a really nice shear cut. But also the cool thing about this, you can see right here, is that I can ride the bevel on a pull cut coming back toward me. So it's a great way to go at that little nubbin and make a nice smooth transition to that curve that you worked with the bowl gouge. It takes a little bit of practice, and sometimes you don't get as smooth of a cut as you want, so you can always transition to a little bit of a scraper to refine this. And you can go back the other direction. And I'm keeping my cutter at about kind of the same thing, about maybe 10 o'clock or so. Now we'll do a couple of little light cuts, and I won't spend too much time on this. So I'll pass this around at the end. And don't judge me if it's not the smoothest surface, because I'm just not gonna make you sit here and watch me do this for 10 minutes. But that's good enough for now. You can also do a little bit of scraping, like it said, like shear scraping, if you want to clean up this cut a little bit. And then just spend some more time if you really want to refine these bumps and get rid of them. But that's good enough for now. Because really what we're going to focus on next is trying to fit the lid so that we have a really nice fit. Yeah, Hunter tools are awesome. Like I said, they can be good game changers. And Mike Hunter, if you've never met him, he's one of the salt of the earth people. He's a great guy. And, when I bought this for the first time a long time ago, something happened where it didn't come, and I sent him an email. He sent me another one, and a couple weeks later, the original tool came. And he was like, yeah, just hold on to it. I'll collect it when I see you next. And I saw him like a year later at a symposium, gave it to him, had a little conversation, and it was super great. Like, he's a good guy. It's also nice to support a fellow woodturner when you buy tools. Small operation, but awesome. All right, so we've got this. Now we want to focus on getting the lid. I'm going to take this off, and we're done with this for now. Got a little bit of sniffles. I'm sorry for that. I know that's annoying. So I'm going to put the lid portion into my chuck. And I'm also going to take a measurement here. I'm just going to use some dividers for this. So we don't need to know the actual measurements. We just want to know the relative width of this. And I'm going to measure or spread these dividers so that they are just slightly less than the diameter of my rim. So that's good right now. So I'm going to keep this right here for just a second. True out the face of my green wood. It doesn't break. That's great. And wood. It doesn't break. If we were in a glass class, my demo would be over. So I'm going to true up the outside, true up the face really quickly, and then we're going to create a lid, and it should go pretty quickly. So it should run relatively true. Again, dogwood is great. I do have fairly limited experience with it. I've turned it before, but it's been a while. But I do remember it as one of those woods that doesn't have a whole lot of radial movement. And it doesn't crack very easily, or readily, I'll say. All right, so I screwed up the side, and push this. So this space that you see on the tailstock side is going to be the bottom of my lid. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a mark, making sure to only touch the front point of my dividers. It's nice when you get it the first time. That's great. And so this is going to be just a little bit too narrow, but I'm going to start out with that and then refine it just a little bit because we want to fit, like I said, a loose tight fit. I want a fit that is pretty loose, but we can give it a little pop and then make it so I can hold the bowl upside down with relative security. Also, that's going to be important for the step when we're going to remove the bottom here. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to use a parting tool, and this is one of those things that sometimes you'll hear, don't ever use a parting tool or something like that on end grain like this. And it's totally fine. It does dull your parting tool really quickly. But as long as I'm not sticking my parting tool in like this, either going on center or raising your handle just a little bit, as it's pushing, I'm going to be fine. And we're not going to use the parting tool very often for anything, so I don't have to worry about it not being sharp. So this, I know, is going to be a little bit too narrow, but I want to see how narrow it is. We're going to sneak up on this fit, and it is pretty close. So I'm just pushing this up here, and I can see that I probably just have a half of a millimeter or so. So let's just do one print, and maybe we'll get this on the second try. Usually I take quite a while on this, but I'm just too nervous to destroy my ego. That's what it comes down to. It's all about ego. Right. We'll just do one more little cut. And when I'm putting my parting tool in, I'm shoving it in, and I'm starting where I'm parallel with the waist, so I'm pushing it straight in. But at the top, I'm going to angle it just slightly inward. And what that's going to do is, going straight, it's going to give me a nice fit. But then angling is what's going to give me that loose, tight fit. Okay. So going straight again gives me a nice fit. Angling in causes the wood and the body to go press just a little bit, and it gives me a nice snug fit if I give it a little pop. So let's see how it goes down. Just a little bit more. I was hoping for glory, once, but not this time. That should be alright. I might have been taking off a little bit too much, but that's okay too. There we go. So that's pretty good. I think I'm a little bit tight, so I'm gonna probably refine this just a little bit. But we can do that in the next step too. So what I'm gonna do, and I will loosen this just a tiny, tiny little bit. I'm gonna start getting rid of this central core. So if I'm imagining my lid right here, I want it to be something like that pecan calabash that's coming around, or that little dogwood that I said I was trying to mimic. And let's just imagine that proportionate to this body, and this will be about how far my body goes in. Then I want the top of my lid to be somewhere around here. Give or take. We have a lot of meat that we can mess with. We have a pretty big chunk, so if we totally mess up the bottom, I think it'd be hard to do at this point, but crazier things have happened. Then we can just do this again really quickly. But I think if my lid is fitting that deep, that'll give me the shape that I want. I'm not gonna draw it all the way around, just have some little reference point is fine. So I'm gonna take a little bowl gouge, just a 3/8 bowl gouge, and I'm gonna start eating away this. And what I'm gonna try to do is create a domed interior surface or a concave surface here. And if you looked at the lids of at least those dogwoods and maybe the pecan going around, I like to keep a flat edge on the outside and then a domed surface that sort of follows the domed curve of the top of the lid. And I think if you consider the benefit of that, that's going to give you the most even wall for the lid. And even though I mentioned dogwood doesn't like to crack, it still will. But if you can sort of follow the curve, then you're going to prevent that from happening. So I'll try to speed up just a little bit more. I'm just taking this bowl gouge, making a push cut, keeping my flute fairly open, coming down, get that little nub, and you can wiggle it around, get rid of that. I like this 3/8 bowl gouge for this because it gives me enough clearance and it has a small enough edge that I can really get a smooth surface. So again, even with something like this, and I'm standing in front of it, I'm doing my Woodturners dance. Right, I can pick up that cut along the curve a little bit. I can do this. Now sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get the continuous curve from the edge. So what you can do, and I think it's a good skill to have as well, is you can turn in reverse. And what that allows you to do is I can then take that push cut and start at the center and then make a nice outward curve. Sometimes you just, for the sake of whatever the project is, you have to start here, and it's that awkward like falling out of a bowl where you have to start way over here, and it's kind of hard to control when your arm's so extended. But if you can turn in reverse, so it's kind of like looking in the mirror. You just got to think about the wood spinning in the other direction. But the same sort of thing, you ride your bevel, do the Woodturners dance, and I'm cutting just as far as the flat that I created. And I have a pretty good surface. Let's just take off a tiny little bit more. I think I think that a little bit. And it's a lot, at least I found it's a lot easier to get this nice, smooth dome interior doing a push cut in reverse. Not critical, but it could be a nice little cheat move. So let's put it back in forward, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this tiny, tiny little nubbin off. I'm going to fix that tight fit with my parting tool again, still here, and then we will shape the lid. So just like anything else, when you get really close to that center, you just want to think about moving. Don't even move your bullet arms, just think about moving. And that'll give you this really nice finishing that toward the interior. I can feel it's a little bit funky, but it's that soft spots. There we go. Perfect. And then I'll take my parting tool, and all I'm going to do is just widen this ever so slightly. And it's really just a matter of not necessarily widening the bottom, but decreasing how much I came in, so that I'm not compressing the bowl quite as much. And this is the nice thing about leaving this little flat right here, is if I took off too much, and that might be the case, we'll double check it, we'll have a little bit of extra wood that I can just move backward and push in once again. So now, it's pretty good. Have a little pop. Well, it doesn't work when you hit your face shield, but so we've got this, that's good right here. Let's start refining or shaping our lid. And we're going to kind of do the same thing, with that rule of thirds or a third from the bottom. It's not as critical on the lid. You'll see a whole lot of variation to that if you're looking at traditional, we say pre-contact forms or the old ancient Hawaiian forms. There's a lot of variation. but you still want to focus on having a nice continuous curve. And I think with the good look, it's nice to have as small of an edge where that lid meets the bowl as possible. All right, while maintaining a little bit of integrity. So I'm just going to take this, and we have that edge or that line that we drew right around here. So I have at least a little bit of a reference. I got my spindle detailed out, and I am just making a cut that is going to terminate right on the edge here. And when I'm doing this, right, not only am I rolling the tool, I'm kind of lifting it up as I'm going across and rolling and lifting. And it's one of those things that it's a little bit of a different dance, but it can give you a really nice smooth surface, and I have this sharp edge that you can just use a little bit of sandpaper to soften that a little bit. Now, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, we're going to just start turning away the top of the lid. So get rid of some wood. I remember the very first demo I ever did. I was turning a heart on a lid, multi-axis thing, and I got these bag catches, and I thought about that for months and months. Like, thought about giving up, selling my lathe. Like, oh, this guy brought me in to demonstrate, and I got a catch. I cannot believe it. And somebody talked to me, and they're like, hey, now we know you're human. So, I don't fret about things like that. Definitely try not to get a catch, but the reason I say that is that I had this tiny little catch there, and I want you guys to hear my excuse. But all I'm doing is I'm just taking this a little bit, little by little, just shaving wood, and making this nice curve. Again, if I was at home, I would spend a whole lot of time really refining this, but for the sake of being fast, we'll just do that. And then I can see that I want to just reduce this height just a little bit. So I'm going to pick up my edge. And do a little bit more. I'm trying to stay away from having kind of a mushroom top look. I want this flattened, really flat curve on this one. All right, but I think that's probably good enough. I can see that my white point is about halfway down. Really, really like this. And that's really good. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my body back on, and I'm going to turn off the tenon on the body, and then we're going to flip this around and use our jaws in expansion mode to turn off the tenon on the top here. I need to put on my tail just like the reason that I started by making the body on the tailstock side and the lid on the headstock side is I know that when I get to this step, that I have the point out right here just to decrease the amount of depth I have to remove. But I know that this is going to line up with that impression that I had before, and everything's going to run true, or as true as possible for this next step. So I'm going to put this in here. This is, again, why that fit is going to be crucial, because we are going to remove as much as possible right here, and then we're going to tape the lid and the body together. Oh, thank you. So that way we can really finish the bottom. So it's running true. I've got everything locked, and then let's turn away this, and then we'll get our friend Peter to sit here, finish the bottom of the body, and finish the lid pretty quickly. So right now I'm just removing wood, and I'm being sure that I'm not encroaching upon what I see as the curve right here. When I've removed enough wood, I can start to pick out my cut. and just progress so that I am transitioning into that sort of rounded bottom that I talked about before. Right, it's pretty close right there. And I see that there's a little bit of a hump right there. We'll fix that in just a second. But I pick that up. It's a little bit more rounded, and now I'm really coming in and I'm flattening this out to about where I want. And that's about the shape that I want. There's a little tiny hump right there. Let's remove that. Again, if I was at home, I would, I like to turn off the lathe, step back, and just stare at what I made for longer than I should. I think it's just kind of an enjoyable thing, but also it's helpful just to take a look with the tool rest out of the way, so your view is completely unobstructed. Plus I'll put the chart so I can see what it looks like upright. And that allows me to really visualize that curve that I'm trying to make. And I can see that it's just a tiny, tiny little bit pointed. So I'll do this, come in, cut this, and that's pretty good. So that's good enough right there. So now what we're gonna do, since we have this snug fit, I know that I can just use my tape clamp, my painter's tape my lid to the body. I'm not gonna have a whole lot of movements. I'll still turn the speed down a little bit, use light pressure. But I don't need to do anything fancy. I don't need to use a jam check or anything like that to finish the bottom, right? Because I know I have a pretty good fit to the lid, and painter's tape is good enough to hold this true. Give it a little squeeze and a turn, and then I can move this away. Move this nubbin. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make this round, and then I'm gonna come in just really lightly make this tiny little indentation that's probably about as wide as this half-inch end of my live center. I'll turn the speed down just a little bit. Just really light cuts. Move my tail stock or my tool rest down just a little bit. Anytime you're moving, we're talking about safety. Anytime you're moving your tool rest while the lathe is on, just be extra aware of where things are. I am probably not alone in saying that I've ruined a piece by being careless like that. So maybe multiple pieces. So I'm just following this curve. Light cuts. So now I have a pretty nice round bottom, and all I'm going to take is just a really, really light cut going in, and it's sort of like when you finish off the bowl of a normal foot, you're making the bottom concave so it sits flat on a flat surface. Right? I'm only having contact on the edge. I'm doing the same exact thing. So now I've finished the bottom here. I have a nice curve. You could feel that there's some imperfections, and you could spend the time doing that. But I'll get out of my own way and just think about that the entire car ride home. No big deal. So I can take this off, set this aside, and I'm going to reverse my lid. Now you always want to make sure, we did strive to have a relatively thin edge coming into this, so we don't have a whole lot of meat on our wood. So you just want to make sure that you're not really cranking down on this. You don't need a whole lot of pressure to hold this. And if you put too much pressure, you're going to crack your lid. And you can always use something like a jam check or a glue check or any other option if you want to, but this is a nice quick option and minimizes the amount of gadgetry that you need. So turn the speed up, and you can get this a number of ways. I'm just use my spindle guide to remove the wood relatively quickly, but I can part this away or do whatever I want to with this. And when you're getting kind of out here, just being sort of gentle, that you're not putting a whole lot of pressure on, on the medial movement, because that's going to be something that puts more pressure on the side wall. And so I can see here, I can start to follow this curve. So if I let this, that would be kind of interesting. Which I like Christmas for some reason, I don't know. But we're going to take that away. We're going to slowly remove it. And at the same time, we can start to really pick up our curve. We're just doing it a step, light pressure, and we're picking this up. A little core. So when I get right here, I'll really take out the edge until I have sort of a point. Because one of the worst things you can do, and it sounds so dramatic to say that, is to have your lid be too flat, where it comes up from this nice curve, and then it's flat across the top. And now since you domed the interior, you don't have enough meat to really make it curve. So I'll keep this point right here, and then I'll just pick up my curve from toward the top. And then just focus on keeping a little bit of a point, so that way you can just continue to refine this. And you can hear a little bit of chatter, and so I'm not holding onto this with a huge amount of pressure. So just take light cuts, and this will be helpful to go to the grinder, get one more sharpening, and that'll really reduce the amounts of time that you have. All right, so the last thing you can just, you scrape this, use a scraper, side of your gouge, and call it good. I've got a tiny, tiny little nub. We'll just remove that, or think about removing that. Another annoying. And then I wanted to do this to just show a good way to present, scraper. Yeah, kind of like spindle roughing gouge, and it probably doesn't apply to anyone here, but I'll see people just hold their scraper like this, real, flat, a lot of surface contact against the tool rest. But if you just roll it and like get a nice little shear scrape, then you get a really, really nice surface. So you can do the thing where you just shave the surface back and forth, and it's really enjoyable to do that. Right? Very, very light pressure, and I'm getting a pretty nice surface. And again, we could spend a whole lot of time really refining that, but I'm happy with that for now. And I've also messed up a project this. I'm in expansion mode, and cool, time to take off my piece, crank it, and then crack, because I tried to expand my jaws when I need to tighten them, close them a little bit. So now we've got our little calabash that has a nice loose, tight fit that I can easily remove. I'll pass this around so you guys can see that it's real. I didn't switch it out, right? But it's not bad. I would change a couple things, but I'm happy with this. So we'll pass this around, you guys can check it out, and we'll move on to the second part, which will go a little bit more quickly. So what do you do if you have a piece of wood that has cracks in it? A whole lot of options. We could spend many, many demos talking about different ways to repair cracks and whatnot. One of the demos would just be to throw the wood away, and that's it. But I think if you have something special, then it's worth trying to save the wood by putting a wooden repair in it. Now I brought this here. I'm not going to do anything with this. This was another section of that dogwood limb that I roughed out, and it has a massive crack here. This would be something where I probably wouldn't use this for a calabash unless it was some really nice piece of rare wood. And then in that case, I would probably make a shim or something to fill the space and then use what I'm going to show you now. But right here we have this big, big crack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on what if you have a crack that comes from just drying, or you have just a crack that's we've often they're turned away and turned away, and you turn and there's still a crack, and you're getting toward the end of what you want to do, and there's still a crack. Well, with calabashes, the traditional method is to use butterflies. We call these peva in this context. I'm not in Hawaii, but I'll still use the term peva. But butterflies or Flying Dutchman or bow ties are the traditional look. Peva in Hawaii means fishtail, right? So it looks like two little fishtails. And I'll pass this around. This is a piece of red cedar, a little lidded calabash I made. The lid is a little bit looser, so just be careful with this one. But it had this really nice crack coming down, and I thought it was just a really nice, pretty piece of wood. So I used these koa peva on the lid, on the bottom, and running down this crack to repair it. It is the traditional repair method for ancient calabashes. It is also a great repair method for a lot of things that aren't ancient. And I think personally it looks more intentional than just filling a crack with epoxy. It gives you more structural support. Epoxy is great, but as soon as that wood moves, it's going to separate eventually from the epoxy. So by having a peva or a butterfly coming across, there we go, with grain running that's opposing the crack, you have this nice structural joint that prevents the wood from expanding. So I have a piece of kind of really spalted black oak that I turned this morning because I knew it had a nice crack. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this as our crack repair demo. So I don't know if you can see it pretty well on the overhead, but here we have this crack, and this crack runs all the way through, right? It's a little bit faint on the interior, but it's right here. And I like the shape of this. I like the wood itself. It was a small limb that's been sitting in my yard for a long time. So I wanted to keep this here and use this as the repair piece. The wood, the lid, we're not going to do anything with that today, but the lid has an even bigger crack on it. That when I finish this, I'll have maybe 3 or 4 bow ties here and then 1 or 2 on the lid itself. There are a lot of different strategies for this. In the handout, I have what I use. I have cut these by hand. I've chiseled out the recess by hand. That takes a long time. So typically, I only do that with really special circumstances. If I have, if I have a really special piece of wood, I'll cut it to shape on a scroll saw, and then I'll take the time to chisel a recess. But for the most part, I just buy a big stock of butterflies from Big Island Engraving in Hawaii. Mark Stebbins, he's a turner, and he has provided a really nice surface by selling templates for routing recesses and also selling. He's got this really nice laser system where he can cut up a lot of bow ties from these nice Hawaiian woods. So like koa is a pretty popular one. That I have a lot of, but I also have, I've got a whole box of different ones here. When you're thinking about what wood to use, there are different sizes and different species, obviously, different species of wood, and there are 2 strategies you can use. I'll pass this around while I'm talking. You can use a peva that sort of blend in. This is a piece of black mesquite, it's a pedestal for something else, but it had this crack that kind of encircled the entire piece. You could almost rip it apart, almost, right? But I use these wangi pua that kind of, or peva that sort of blend in with the black, so the black mesquites, and then they show a little bit of contrast when you have the brown of the mesquite. And this is a piece of cowrie that I made just like a salad bowl shape. That I used some koa peva that's is a little bit more contrasty, but it's that same sort of red tones mixing it with the brown tones. So you kind of get into color theory and really preference, but the basic things are: do you want your butterflies to blend in, or do you want them to stand out? And typically I like them to stand out. If I'm making a crack repair that's going to be as obvious as this piece of wood, then I want to highlight that, right? But sometimes you want them to blend in if that's not the focus. Like that is just a pedestal for something. I don't want the pedestal to steal the show, so I use this functional repair that sort of blends in. That way what's on the pedestal gets the highlights. But I think for this, let's use something that is pretty nice. One thing to consider, let's just use some koa peva for this. Another thing to consider is I've got this piece of oak. Oak is typically pretty hard, but it's got some spalting in it. It's sort of punky. So it's a little bit softer. If I put a pavement that's a really hard wood and something that's really soft, when I go to do my final sanding, you're gonna feel that, right? Because you're gonna remove more wood from in this case, the calabash than the pavement. And you'll have this little bump where the pavement will be kind of proud. Likewise, if I use a butterfly or a pavement that's too soft, when I go to sand, I'm gonna have a divot. So you wanna try to match up the density of the wood for the body and the pavement itself. We're going to use koa. It's a little bit softer. It's not super soft, but it's a little bit softer than, I've got some bloodwood and I have some wangi here. It's softer than those. But let's use koa. So we're going to use hot melt glue. I'm going to get that going. It takes just a few minutes to heat up, and I'll talk about that as it's going. But I think for this, I've got a few different sizes. Let's see, I'll pass around this bag right here so you can see this. This is the biggest thing that I have. I've used bigger ones, but this is 1.4 inch. The ones that I'm going to use for this are a little bit more proportional to this calabash. I've got 0.5 inch, and that's the length of the butterfly. So they're pretty small. And I'll put one up here so you can kind of see how small these are. But I've got a relatively small vessel right here, and I don't want to have something giant. I want to have something that's proportionate to this. Also, if you see right here, there's a little bit of a bug trail and some frass. I think that's the term of that. So that'll probably clean out in the end. So I don't want my butterfly to extend over that, because then I'll just have this weird like bridge that I don't want to highlight. So I'm going to use these little ones, and I'll just put one in for now, just so you can see the process. But I can see I've got a crack here, and there's a crack there. So I'll probably, if I just did a layout right here, thinking about how I'm going to repair this in the end, I would kind of look at my crack and lay out maybe 1, 2, and 1 right here. And just kind of thinking about this. And I know that these two, even though they're very small, my crack's not big. And if I put these two pavement right here, that's going to be strong enough to keep that crack from expanding this way, and it's going to be a nice joint that keeps the crack from expanding widthwise. I don't need more than 2. I could put an extra one, but at a certain point you start getting a little bit crowded. I'm not trying to make this look like stitches. I just want to make this look like a cool triangular repair that looks traditional. I say it looks traditional because I'm not using stone tools to to carve out a recess or anything like this. Traditional with modern methods. But we'll do one right here, and we'll do this one right at the top. So there are the steps you can follow in the handouts, and you can really look on the screen. I don't know if that would be beneficial. But what I typically like to do first is I will coat the area of my bowl with shellac. And what that, you can use lacquer or something similar, but shellac is awesome. It's a great material, it's natural, and I just think it's awesome that it comes from a bug. If you didn't know that, yeah, shellac comes from the lac insects, and it's this resin that they secrete, right? That's been refined into shellac flakes. I've got a bag of flakes right here. They're somewhat expensive, but I bought these a heck of a long time ago, and I have maybe a quarter of the bag left. And I'd say relatively expensive. It was 30 bucks for that bag. And when I bought it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is 30 bucks. But I have used it a lot. And I will typically make a 1 pound cut right here. Shellac is measured in pound cuts. So a ½ pound cut is going to be more dilute than a 2 pound cut. So if you're doing like a French polish, or you're doing like finishing, getting a fine finish in shellac, typically you'll start with a weaker cuts, like a ½ pound or a 1 pound cuts, and then move up to heavier cuts when you get to the top coats. But here, I'm using, yes sir?
Well, the shellac, isn't it when it's dried, you have to be really careful to sand it because it's toxic debris, correct?
Somewhat, yeah, and that's partly why I use a pretty light cut, because it's much more alcohol than shellac, and when I'm sanding, you don't get a whole lot of residue that's coming out. And so I would use just a normal, I don't have a papper or anything like that. I think that would be pretty cool to have forced air system, but I'll have like what is R2 masks, and I'll just use the same thing I'd use for dust protection for that. But also, I'm glad you mentioned that. The other reason I don't use a heavier cut is this 1 pound cut is great in that it doesn't gum up your sandpaper, and it's gonna give you the protection you need. The whole reason we're doing this is so that the glue that we use to attach our butterfly doesn't mar the surface or discolor the surface of the wood. So the shellac gives me the coating, it seals the pores, especially of something like this oak that's pretty porous, but it's going to seal the surface so that way I can clean up any glue pretty easily and I don't have a discolored surface for my glue. We'll use CA glue and some activator just to keep things quickly, but sometimes I'll use Tide Bond or something like that for a more permanent finish. So what I start out with is I just take a little bit of paper towel or whatever. I've got an applicator in there. Made of metal. It's real sturdy. Thank you. And I'll just rub this along the surface. Quite a bit more surface than I need to, just so that I don't have any glue dripping out. This also helps with the hot melt glue. I'm going to put tape down, but sealing the shellac is a way to, or sealing the surface is a way to make it just easier to clean up. And I'm all about easy cleanup. I've got toddlers at home, so any way I can help with cleanup without actually doing more work, fantastic. All right, and including this. Oh, thank you. Shellac dries pretty quickly too, especially a 1 pound cut that is a lot of alcohol. And it's not a demo on shellac, so I'll stop talking about it. But typically I'll measure this by weight instead of volume. So if well, it doesn't matter. I think I put it. I don't think I put it in there, but it's like 12 grams of shellac flakes and 79 grams of alcohol make a 1 pound cut, and so it's already dry for the most part. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little pencil right here, fancy orange box store pencil, and I'm going to put my butterfly back right here where it was. I want to make sure that the middle of my butterfly, this skinny point, is right in the middle of my crack, or as close to it as possible. That's going to give even support on both sides of the crack. And so I have this placed. I also, if I have multiple, I'm going to line them up so you have just this nice parallel like single file line of pivot instead of just kind of wonky. It just looks better if everything's cleaner. So I know I'm going to put this right here, but I need to remove it, so I'm going to make a little pencil mark. And you can see that my axis of my butterfly is 90 degrees to the crack, right? And that pencil mark is going to help me with registration when I put my template on. So my shellac's in place, it's dry, I've got my pencil mark there, that's going to indicate where I'm going to route. And now I have templates here. And these are just these little acrylic templates that you can buy. They have 5 different sizes. I have just 3, the extra small, the medium, and the extra large. That covers a good range of sizes. And I put painter's tape on the bottom of my templates, and that's just going to help with cleanup. So I'm going to put hot glue on here, but hot glue sticks to acrylic like glue sticks to things. So having painter's tape here is a really good way to keep this surface clean, and it's going to be on the back of my template. So we'll just put a couple strips of painter. I can't believe how expensive painter tapes got. So the last time I went to the store to buy a couple rolls,
everybody uses it now, Bruce.
yeah, it's just,
The advertising works too well.
I know, I need to find an alternative. Can you make your own? That'd be kind of cool, right? But yeah, it's crazy expensive now. But it's still sort of like sandpaper. Use it like somebody else is paying for it, because a roll will last quite a bit of time, and I'd rather spend just a little bit more money on an extra roll of tape than to spend a lot of time cleaning up hot glue every time I do this. I do this a lot. All right, so now I have painter's tape right here. It's nice it landed in shavings, right? I'm going to put one more strip on this, and then I'm going to put painter's tape around the boundary of where I'm going to route. And really, that does 2 things for me. Right? Since I have painter's tape on my template, it's kind of hard to see everything around here, even though all I'm really caring about is that pencil line right here. But this is going to help frame exactly what I'm routing. The more beneficial thing, though, is this is going to keep the hot melt glue as much as possible off of my wood surface. And even though I sealed it with shellac, especially here where I have those little bug holes, if hot melt glue gets down there, it's going to be a lot of time and effort to clean it up. And when I could just stick a few pieces of tape on it and call it good. Again, it's a little bit overload, but use it like somebody else is paying for it. And I'm going to leave this on here for quite a while. But my hot glue should be done. Thank you for putting the plate down. You guys have a pretty nice facility here. Steve knows about our meeting spot. You were probably there during I think you might have been there in a winter demo, but you've been there when it's hot, I'm sure. And it is, I had to do a demo once and it was like 90 degrees in the room. And so I'm nervous enough and sweating enough during the demo, but I'm just like dripping sweat. Everybody's taking naps and they're sleeping and are soaking wet. It was miserable. This is a sweet setup.
The seniors have lunch here every day.
Oh, no kidding. That's pretty cool.
It's the dining hall.
Yeah, it's nice. Do you guys do demos for them and things like that?
We're doing one Monday.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. All right, so hot glue is amazing stuff. I use it for a lot of different things. I do some pieces where I have glue chucks, and hot melt glue is a strong connection for these things that are spinning off center, and it's amazingly strong. But sometimes that's the downside. Like I said, it likes to stick to things. So the hot glue I buy isn't anything specific. I think it might be the high temperature version, but it was the cheapest stuff that I could find at the store. And I bought a box of 100 sticks, which they come in these little opaque white sticks. And I probably have maybe half the box left, and I've used it quite a bit. So first I put hot melt glue, hot melt glue, whatever you want to say, on the template first. And I put a pretty fat bead around my entire edge. And then I'll flip that around and I'll try to line up so that my pencil line is parallel to the axis of the recess here for where we're going to route. And also I have these little points on my templates that I'm going to line with the crack. Right? And that gives me the best chance of having the bow tie in on this kind of even distribution position. But since we're on a curved surface, you also want to make sure that your template isn't, it's not like this, so that if we had this really tilted template in a route, I'm going to be deep on this side and shallow on this end. So I'm looking at the edges to make sure I have about the same amount of space up here, right, from when I say space from the template to the bowl up here as I do on this side. Sometimes it can't be helped. And in some situations, like if I was putting a template right on the edge of the rim, or maybe toward the bottom of the bowl where it's this really acute curve, really obvious curve, then I'll use little pieces of wood or shims or something and glue that so I have this really nice support. When I'm routing, I want as little movements with this as possible. And I'll put just a little bit of extra glue right here. But if we have a little bit of movement, that's all right. So the benefit of having excess tape around is you could be pretty liberal with your hot glue, and you know that you don't have to stick another piece of tape on in an awkward position, or you don't run the risk of, well, I could put hot glue here, but I also don't want to mar the surface, so let's just not do it. And then you have movement here. It just gives you sense of mind and confidence with this. All right, it takes just a minute to set up. But, one of the things that's worth talking about is the router that you use, right? So the smaller the router base, the better. So I've got a little Makita. It doesn't really matter what the brand is. I mean, brands do matter in terms of ease of operation, ergonomics, and whatnot. But this is a Makita laminate router or palm router, either one. So it has this relatively small circular base. And in the router, I have a bushing and a spiral downcut bit. What that means is this bushing is keeping it does two things. It keeps my bit centered. It's a relatively small bit, it's 1/8 inch diameter. It keeps it centered, but also this spacer right here is just the right space so that as this is moving around my template, right, I have a border that allows me to cut just the perfect size recess for my butterfly. The downside is it sort of blocks your view, so you kind of have to go by feel with this. A spiral downcut bit, what that means is as it's cutting, it's forcing chips down, right? So if I had an upcut bit, for example, that's beneficial in certain situations. But if I was doing this and I had an upcut bit, I am cutting in an upward motion. and I'm going to end up with this frayed edge or tear out along the edge. But with downcut bits, I'm forcing all of my shavings down, and it's keeping the upper surface of my bowl really clean. The downside to that is you have to take a few passes because you end up filling your recess with shavings, so you just got to stop, blow them out, and take a couple of passes. With these Pava, you don't need to go very deep. We're not going to go all the way through the bowl. I'm going to cut about, say, 1/8 of an inch into the bowl, and that's it. If I cut all the way through, think about the lack of support you're getting. I'm basically fitting a puzzle piece into a hole, and the only support I'm getting is around the edge of that puzzle piece. If I cut so that I'm not cutting all the way through, now I have a floor for glue to set up. And the amount of surface area that my butterfly is in contact with the wood of my bowl is much, much, much more than if I was cutting through. If I cut all the way through, I could just pop that through with my thumb, no matter what sort of epoxy or whatever you use. By having a floor, you have really strong contact and a lot of surface area for glue and wood.
You want to verify the thickness of the wall before you start?
That is something that you want to think about. So with this, typically what I'll do is say this was just a log that I cut this out of this morning. But if it is a second turning, I'll typically kind of think about my depth. I'll finish the outsides, preliminarily sand the outside, then put my butterflies in, and then I'll go to the interior with kind of a mental note of how deep did I put my butterflies in. And I'll try to cut so that I'm as thin as possible, but also as beefy as possible to not, to reveal the butterflies on the inside. So yeah, you definitely want to think about that. If you look at these on some of those old calabashes that are super thin, the ancient makers were incredibly skilled, and they made really big, really thin calabashes that are, think like a 1/16 of an inch wall thickness with like a 1-inch bottom, so it's really hefty, on a bowl that's 18, 20 inches diameter. Incredible, and they have these nice intricate designs that you can only see on the repair jobs on the outside. So their depth is really, really minor, and that's where I know I'm rambling, but that was a really good question for jumping off points. If I'm using a router, I'm cutting a flat surface. Right, so right here, the deepest part that I'm cutting is right in the middle. But if I have a really thin wall and I want to do the same sort of thing, that's when I would hand cut it. And I would shape the bottom of the butterfly so that it has the same curve as the bowl. And that way I could have a thin, like maybe 1/16 or 1/32 of an inch depth. And it fits really well on all sides. Yeah. Thank you for that question. It was really, really good. There's also a little bit of magic about having some visible repair on the outside and nothing on the inside. I think that's just kind of cool in its own right. So now we're going to route, and I'll just put my safety glasses on for this. I think that'll be all right. The worst thing that you can do with this is start up your router. Routers are scary if you don't have a lot of experience. This is something that's moving much faster than your lathe is moving, and it's really sharp. Right, the tool is moving, not the wood. There are horror stories about routers that I don't want to talk about. Not for me. I've never had a router accident. I've had some wake-up calls where, again, you're a YouTube expert. You think you know what you know, and then just kind of slow down and be good. But the worst thing I can do with this is to start this up and then try to align this, especially with a 0.5-inch Pava that's really small, and then just plunge cut it like this. Best case scenario, it works, but more likely is I'm going to have a little bit of a jump, and I'm going to damage either the edge of my template or, me. And, the template's probably more valuable than me, but I don't want to damage either one. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to the side right here, and I'm going to turn it on. I'm just going to pivot it to the inside. Let's see. I think this isn't a permanent spindle lock, so maybe I can just use the indexer to...
Yeah, you can use the index for that.
There we go, perfect. Cool, this is a great lathe. And definitely, you always want to make sure that the tool is on, especially routers. Like, if there's a time to be extra safety conscious, it's with a router. So the way that this works is I have this little cog and wheel system. I know there's a technical rack and pinion. I think that's what it is. where I can just rotate this to increase or decrease the depth. So starting out, I'm going to make a relatively shallow pass. I always want to verify this. I can see that the foot of my router is just about 1/8 of an inch off the top of this, and that is good enough, right? So I'm going to put this in position. This might be a little bit challenging to see with the camera. You're skilled though, I think you'll make it work. And I'm going to put it so that the bit is touching the wood. Then I'm just going to pivot it just a little bit, turn it on, and then I'll drop it down right there. I use this so much and now I'm still having to search for the power button. There we go. So I'm making... So I'm moving slowly. I can't see anything. So I'm just feeling where I'm hitting the edge of the template. And I put the perimeter, I'm doing these little wiggle passes to hog out the interior. Sort of like when you're starting, you don't want to start your router outside. I don't want to pull this up while my router's still going for safety reasons, but also I have nicked this template once, and it was because I forgot to turn off the router and I just pulled it out and it didn't really affect anything, but it could have ruined my template. So now I have a recess that's maybe about 1/16 of an inch deep. I'm going to set the bit a little bit deeper, make another pass. Same sort of thing, pivot it in. Follow the boundary. Hog out the interior. Now when you're doing something like one of those 1.4 inch butterflies, it takes a while with this. So you can have a 2 router system where you have like a 1/4 inch bit, same or with the equivalent bushing for the size, and then finish off with the 1/8 inch, but it's whatever. So I think that's probably about deep enough. Sometimes it's a good idea, it's pretty clear right here, but sometimes it's a good idea to do a second or another final pass at the same depth, just to ensure that those shavings that fill up the recess didn't cause the depth to fluctuate at all. Right. But it looks pretty clean. This wood is manageable with just a couple passes. Unplug your router before anything else. Set it aside, and then what we're going to do is take this off. Now the problem that we end up with is, when you're routing, you can't route sharp edges. At least with this. Maybe if you had a CNC and you're doing something like that, you could get pretty close. But doing this, my edges are going to be round, and you can buy round butterflies and then just stick it in, glue it, and be done with it, and that's fine. But the butterflies that I have are sharp cornered because they're just the more traditional look, and I think it's sort of a matter of preference, but if I'm doing something that looks as traditional, if I'm doing this traditional-esque type of repair, I want it to look as traditional as possible. So I'm going to take the time to chisel out the edges of the corners so I can fit my pivot in there. So set this aside. For a 0.5 inch pivot, you have to use some small chisels. So I'm going to start out with just a little carving chisel that is going to get me the start of this. Let's see. You see this? All right, perfect. And what I do is instead of, I don't have a hammer or anything, right? So I'm going to line up my bevel with the edge right here, and I'm just going to make a little slice. So I'm not compressing the fibers, I'm slicing them. And I'm putting this in just deep enough so that the edge or the very tip of my chisel is cutting where I can see that if I imagine this line coming from this end is going to meet. So I'll do that for all 4 corners. Sometimes it's nice if you can go on the other side of the lathe just for clearance issues or ergonomics, but I won't do that. And this is where it really benefits you to take your time, right? Especially if you have something like a softwood. That red cedar calabash that I passed around was really soft, and some of the some of the pavement have just not the best borders because I got some tear outs or compression as I was going. So I did that, but now I have to come in and take care of the other side. So I have this 1/8 inch mortise chisel that's going to allow me to do the same thing, but give me the clearance so I can really get into that corner. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just moving sideways and slicing the fibers. Right. I'm trying to be as careful as possible, especially with something like oak, where you have a pretty good variety of, those rays are really hard, and when it's spalted, the surrounding wood is a little bit softer. Right. Take your time so that you don't end up pulling the fibers apart or compressing something. And if it's not perfect, it's all right. It doesn't really matter. It's just something to think about on the car ride home. Right. We'll do this. We got 2 more. And now, with that little bit of extra time that it took to do this, I think we have a cleaner look than if we were to put rounded pavement in. There's also something to be said about that nice contrast. You're focusing on these smooth, continuous curves, and now you have this repair that's just this sharp, just really, really juxtaposition, and I think that's appealing. There we go. So then all you can do, or all you have to do now is just, if you find that on the inside you have a little bit left, just clear it out some. That should be pretty good. So now we're going to glue this in place, and we've taken the time to seal the surface with shellac. So I'm going to use some CA glue right here. You always want to make sure that you can. There it is. These little things get lost. So I've dropped many of these in shavings before, and it's kind of just like a sacrifice. They'll never be found again. All right, to make sure that you have the right size, don't put this in all the way. It's really hard to remove. Just put the corners in to make sure everything fits, and it fits right here. So we'll set this aside. I'm going to take some medium CA glue, super glue, cyanoacrylate, I'm not sure. I'm just seeing. I know the cyano is right, but it's the acro something. Is that?
Acrylate.
Acrylate. I threw in an extra N. I don't know where that came from. But I'll just put this in. So it doesn't really flood the surface, but it covers the bottom surface completely. And if you have some gaps, that's all right, because when I put my little pivot in here, it's going to spread everything out. I'll do this, and I'm not going to use a hammer or anything. I'll just take the back of my chisel, pound this down until you get that nice seated sound. Being really gentle, especially when you have something that's really thin. This isn't super thin, but there's a point where you're like, how hard can I pound this before I just break something, right? Or if you're doing this to reinforce a knot, it's really easy to press too hard and the knot comes out the other side. You've just wasted your time. Right? But that's pretty good. And like I said, sometimes I'll use Tide Bond or PVA glue and just let it sit overnight. But for the sake of the demo, and a lot of times I'll also just use CA glue because, like, if I'm doing 10 or 15, it's just faster and it's kind of nice, right? But I'll use a little bit of activator to set this in place. And then what you can do, so this is good right now, is you can remove the surface in a few different ways. Typically, I will start with my little carving chisel and I'll focus on the corners. I heard the phrase once a long time ago. Now keep in mind, a chisel is a two-handed tool, because there's a lot of people that start out, you're like, oh cool, I've got a lot of control with one hand, and they'll start doing this, and then you cut yourself. Right? So I say a lot of people, including me, I've done that. But use a lot of fine control to really remove these corners, or alternatively, you can just turn this away. The thing with turning this away, you want to make sure that the surface of your bowl, whatever you're putting these in, is true. So that way you don't have any chatter or anything that's going to mar the surface of your products. But you also want to make sure that as you're turning it, you're not going to create tear out. So this would be all right since the grain is running this way. If I put my if I turn this away, it's not going to be too bad. But if I had a pavement that was running this way and the grain was running parallel to the ways, if I started to turn that, I would probably rip some fibers out and have to deal with a little bit of tear out on the butterfly itself. One thing that you can do, and I won't do this here, just so we don't have CA flumes, is if I want to turn this away, and I'm using something like Wenge that's not the best thing to turn, but it's a beautiful wood. It's really easy to get tear out with that. I'll just reinforce the pavement with thin CA. I'll put a flood coat on it, let it soak in, and then that usually strengthens the fibers to ensure you're not going to get a whole lot of tear outs. But once you get pretty close to the surface, I'm really making sure that I don't get too deep so I don't have a dent in my pava. Right? I'm just moving really carefully, shaving away the surface of the pava only. Once you get pretty close, you can take some sandpaper and something like a flat backer, like a piece of wood, and just really make these nice kind of flowing sanding motions and sand this, and then take something like sanding sponge and finish sand this in this points. And now you have this surface that's flush. You have this repair that looks pretty good. The only thing that you might be left with is little gaps around the edge. Like if enough glue didn't come up or there was too much of a space, you get some wiggle room with your templates. You'll have some gaps to fill, and you can just do the old glue and sawdust trick, fill it, and you end up with, you'll have a little bit of a dark line around the edge, and that's okay. Find that with CA glue, that dark line is even darker than if you use something like Type On 2 or 3. But even if you do have a dark line, that's all right. It's not that big of a deal. It's not like you're trying to hide your repair job anyway. Right? But you do want to make sure that you don't have any gaps. Right? But for the sake of, I really don't like the sand during demos, so we're just going to call that good enough. I'll pass this around so you can see this. But then, like I said, the next steps would be I could either sand this flush, I could just turn it flush, and then finish sand it, and it would just take a little bit of time to do that. Right. But we've got one in place, and I think that's all I'll do for the demo, so you guys don't have to watch me do that same thing again. But I will say, do you guys do a raffle where you like sell the demo pieces? Cool. I have this one that I was planning on if we had time to make another one that I'll finish this up and put a repair on the top so you have this paper on top. I'll mail it to you.
Thank you.
It should be pretty cool. And then, yeah, so it's a pretty simple process. It's kind of an order of operations thing, but looking for my check key. There we go. There it is.
Turn the index off.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to remove this for now, but I also probably would have screwed that up. Pass this around so you can see that. It's a little bit proud, but I got as close as quickly with the carving chisel as possible. Just about 5-10 seconds of sanding would make that pretty flush. It's a good functional repair. It is also something that looks traditional. So if you are really trying to make a traditional looking calabash and you have a crack that you need to repair, put a sharp cornered paper in, and it really enhances the value. If we were in Hawaii trying to sell these things, if I tried to sell something like that here, I don't know what I'd get for it, but if I was in Hawaii, I would multiply that price times 10. And then if I've got a good friend, Kelly, who turns a lot of calabashes, he says for every pava he puts into a bowl, he adds $15 to the price. And he's had some bowls where it's like 20 pavas, so it's an extra $400 that gets added onto a calabash that's already going to sell for $800 or $1,000. It's wild. I need to be able to afford to live in Hawaii. That'd be cool. But I don't, so mostly do it for aesthetics, and I think it adds a little bit of craftsmanship value to the final piece. Do you guys have any questions about anything? Cool, I hope I didn't run too
I just
long.
want to say very, very good.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. Again, sorry about the sniffles. I know I would be in the audience thinking, oh my gosh, stop breathing.
No, we didn't.
But I appreciate you having me here. It's fun. It's a beautiful country. The drive is nice when you get to be in the woods for most of it. And yeah, thanks again.
I know the men probably know, but us women want to know how you get your name and.
Oh yeah. I used a little engraver for that. I bought at Harbor Freight's it was like $7, a little electric vibration engraver. It comes with a tip that is really sharp, and the whole tip is an eighth of an inch, but it terminates in this really sharp point, like sharp enough to not poke your finger. But it vibrates super fast, and you just have to stabilize your wrist, and then just kind of like
And then you just made that design that's in the
Mhm.
middle?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted it to match kind of this rim design. I got this is a piece of I'll stop talking a little bit, but since you asked, it's fun to talk about wood. This is a piece of swamp cowrie. It's this New Zealand wood that has been buried in these peat swamps, bogs for thousands of years, and you pull it up, and the wood is it's the worst wood I've ever worked with, but it has a really nice chatoyance to it, and it was sent to me by a friend in New Zealand. And he sent me a little bowl, and he said, match this bowl with the bigger one. So I turned it and added my own flair to it. But I added this because he had a feature on the inside, and I just wanted to put something cool on the bottom that matched it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Engraver was a game changer, though. I used to use a wood burner with like a 1/8-inch ball tip. And especially in some woods like oak, it's just you go from barely moving and then hit some softer grain, and you just ruin the entire signature. So engravers are great. It's still a little bit of practice and steady hands, but gives you a nice fine signature.